Is Oreki Houtarou living life wrong? That is the defining question of Hyouka. He lives his life doing only what he must do. Everything else is simply a waste of his time. His grey view of the world suits him the best. He doesn't have to get involved with all the drama and he can truly be happy. Or so he thinks. In reality, he spends his days looking at people from a window, giving the illusion of peace. In truth, he's hiding behind his rationalizations because he is afraid. His energy conservationist ways, his avoidance and apathy only ever served him to get through the days. Here's what's good about Hyouka though. Hyouka doesn't exactly say that this way of living is wrong either. The reason I think Hyouka's messaging with Oreki hits so well is not because his ideology is rejected and shunned. He isn't wrong for wanting to live a life of simplicity and efficiency, but if he's only doing it because he's afraid, Hyouka argues that most people like him just need a good reason to change. Oreki's change through Hyouka isn't an upheaval of his character, it's a slight shift of his perspective. A slight shift that moves him a little bit more towards the side of caring, and a shift that makes the biggest difference to his life. To start with though, let's talk about Oreki's gift. He is brilliant. He has an exceptional ability to notice little details and come up with deductions about seemingly random events. Hyouka uses his gift to show some of his biggest changes throughout the story. What if I told you that there's a drastic difference between Oreki's deductions between the start and end of Hyouka? Oreki at the start sees the world in a way that suits only him and chooses methods that make him do the least amount of work possible. This warps his perception of reality and hurts his ability to deduce. In episode 1, he doesn't care about being deceitful to Chitanda just so he could go home a little bit quicker. In the first real arc of the show with Hyouka, Oreki clearly ignores Sekitani-jun as a person. He comes to the wrong conclusion that it was Sekitani-jun who sacrificed himself for his fellow students, when in reality Sekitani-jun was nothing but a helpless scapegoat. Someone who was forced into an impossible situation and forced to leave his school for a mistake he didn't even make. In the Hot Springs arc with the two sisters, he comes to a rather cynical conclusion that because the older sister had possessive tendencies, that maybe the two sisters don't get along that well, which wasn't exactly the truth. Here's the thing about these mistakes. From the perspective of the narratives present, these mistakes didn't matter. Oreki still ended up solving whatever problems existed in whatever arc. Sure, he messed up a small portion of the truth, but it's something that usually ended well for him anyway. Or did it really? In episode 1, after deceiving Chitanda, we see him regretting it almost immediately, where at the start of the episode he proudly states his deeply flawed motto. By the end of it, after deceiving Chitanda, there is clear shame in his voice while announcing it again. He chose to deceive Chitanda because it was convenient for him at the moment, and then he couldn't even justify it to himself.
やらなければいけないことなら手短にだ。
Houtarou、それは良くないね。もっと披露するなら堂々と胸を張って言うべきだ。今のHoutarouは単に言い訳をしたようにしか聞こえない。
At the start of the Hyouka arc, Chitanda clearly describes listening to her uncle's story and breaking down into tears. A key detail of this story was that even when Chitanda was crying, her uncle never really bothered to comfort her. Which does mean that this story was a painful one for Sekitani-jun, so much so that he had so much anger and resentment he couldn't even comfort his crying niece. This is something Oreki clearly ignores. There are mistakes in Oreki's early deductions. What these mistakes ultimately meant though is that Oreki refused to look at the people in the stories. People are messy, they're complicated. It's much easier to just look past them and come to a solution that kind of fits the problem anyway. As long as the solution fits the puzzle, why does it matter if the answer mischaracterizes a few people on the way, right? I mean, when is it ever going to end up mattering? Chitanda Eru is someone who, with a curious mind, engages with the world around her. If something interests her, then she moves wholeheartedly towards understanding the whole picture. The people involved matter to her. Whether she knows them well or not, Chitanda is comfortable in her ability to be curious about them. She wears her heart on her sleeve and feels no shame for her curiosity. These stories, these people, are the ones that truly matter to her in the moment, and she doesn't choose to invalidate those feelings. Instead, she chooses to embrace her own feelings and moves forward towards understanding them. That's the force of nature she was, curiosity itself. If she felt like an answer didn't fit the people in the story, she challenged his assumptions and longed for a complete answer. Like in the film arc, whilst all the other members rejected the presented theories based on logic, Chitanda was the only one who rejected them based on who she thought the writer Hongo was. Chitanda avidly cares about people. Oreki understood very quickly that he wasn't escaping the Chitanda problem. When he tried to avoid it, it only ever caused him pain. While their relationship only started out as Oreki giving in to Chitanda's whims, this is something Oreki realized he wanted to care about. Chitanda's motivations, her feelings. As troublesome and annoying as her curiosity was for him, it turned out that coming up with an answer that Chitanda liked was the thing that shifted the balance for Oreki. He saw something she had that he didn't have, a rosy outlook at life. Without her, Oreki would have never gotten the opportunity to change. It all comes together to a great turning point in the film arc. Oreki, as he usually does, loses sight of the author writing the murder mystery. He comes up with a twist ending that doesn't exactly suit the story being written. This time it all goes wrong for him though. This film arc is when it truly matters. After being called out by Satoshi and Ibara, he felt bad, but he still tried to deflect the problem away, thinking what he did was justified. I mean, he really didn't have a lot of resources to work with. It was only when he saw Chitanda disapprove of the ending that it finally made him think. Whilst Oreki pretended that he came up with the ending Hongo intended, the truth was that he never once thought about Hongo herself. He never thought of what kind of story she was trying to write. Oreki in this arc got manipulated into thinking that he was special. It made him lose sight of what really mattered. If he had thought about the clues present, he could have easily come up with the ending Hongo intended. Instead, he picked the evidence that he found convenient and came to a conclusion that he liked, which meant that he came up with an ending that Hongo herself would hate. Oreki chose to take the easy way out, and this time it really came back to haunt him. The guilt he felt when he realized all of this crushed him. It caused him to reconsider his entire approach. He realized the trap he'd fallen into. This was a fall from grace. Oreki had finally faced the consequences for his approach to life. It's this failure, this disappointment from Chitanda that finally made a difference in his mind. The Oreki we see from this arc onwards is on the precipice of change. The school festival arc is definitely my favorite arc of the show, and it's the most important one for Oreki's payoff. From the start of this arc, Oreki is left alone in the club room. The other members of the club go out and advertise to sell copies of Hyouka. The usual Oreki would have loved this situation. In fact, he's the one who volunteered for it. Yet, not even a day in, and we see him grow restless. He's jealous of Satoshi enjoying the festival while he has to sit around and do nothing. By the second day of the festival, we already see him looking the other way, outside where all the fun was. He actually felt like he was missing out for once. It's this very restlessness that moves him towards his uncharacteristic behavior in this arc, asking about the rumors, throwing the bag to help the team, and most importantly, finding the culprit behind the incidents. When it came to solving the story behind this arc though, Oreki's approach was different. He didn't care about the items being stolen and from where, he cared about why they were being stolen. Only when he thought about the motivation behind the actions could he figure out that there was more to the mystery. Eventually, this led him down the path of investigating a manga called A Corpse by Evening, where he, with the help of a few other people, came to the conclusions that he did. This was one of the first times in Hyouka where Oreki got it all correct. He uncovered the mystery, thought about the person, and came to a more complete answer. It really was a perfect victory. That in itself would have been a great step forward for him, but you know what's even better about this arc? It's why he did it. From the very start of the arc, the members of the Classics Club were overwhelmed by the number of anthologies they had to sell. As a result, each member of the club was trying their very hardest to advertise their club. Oreki took an interest in this very cause. He thought about his friends going around and advertising and wanted to do something to help, which is exactly why he came up with the plan to sell a bunch of copies to the culprit Tanabejiro. He also ended up devising a plan that garnered a lot more attention to their club, thus selling even more copies of Hyouka. It's no exaggeration to say that he was the reason they managed to sell all their copies of Hyouka. This Oreki is different. He's the type to use his gift for his friends. He doesn't just sit around and do nothing and pretend it's luck when he gets the right answers. In this arc, he took initiative and he solved a mystery that didn't even need solving, all for the sake of helping his friends. As beautiful as this arc is for Oreki's payoff though, this isn't even all Hyouka has in store for his payoff. From here, what starts is Oreki's ultimate victory lap. From this arc onwards, the Oreki we see is ever so slightly different. He's more willing to participate in life and more willing to care about the people around him. A case of this shows up in the story with the helicopter and the mountain range. Oreki states his belief about his teacher Ogi liking helicopters. When he realizes that he's the only one who thought that, he goes out of his way to find the truth. The truth was that Ogi didn't just like helicopters, he was so desperately glad that one finally showed up to save his clubmates. After learning this, Oreki even realizes that saying his teacher Ogi likes helicopters is quite an insensitive thing to say. The truth of the matter now felt like a responsibility to him. This is something that clearly wouldn't have mattered to the Oreki of the past. This helicopter story is actually a parallel. This is almost the same approach taken by Chitanda in episode 6. Chitanda gets angry at her teacher for unfairly yelling at her class. When the root of the problem was diagnosed by Oreki, Chitanda reconsiders her anger and even considers apologizing for it. She got angry at her teacher without understanding the whole picture. This parallel feels like Hyouka's way of showing Chitanda's influence on Oreki. By the time the helicopter story comes around, Oreki has been affected by Chitanda's view of the world and adopted it. It's one of the more blatant showcases of her influence. In the Valentine's Day story, Oreki figures out the truth behind the missing chocolates and supports both Chitanda and Satoshi through the tough situation. He even goes as far as to notice a change in Satoshi, something that clearly wouldn't have mattered to the Oreki of the past. He manages to handle the whole situation without hurting anyone because of who he'd now become. Oreki's change is a change of priorities. From wanting to save as much energy as possible to realizing that there are more important things to care about in life. We still see glimpses of the old Oreki now and then though. In the Valentine's episode, we see him so desperately wanting to go home after the snow had cleared up. Yet he also realized how much time and effort was put into making those chocolates by Ibara. He also sees how emotionally invested Chitanda was in the situation and realizes that he's much better off helping out. This is exactly why the change in Hyouka doesn't feel so unbelievable. The old Oreki Houtarou we knew is still in there, he's just simply overruled by the current version of himself. The version of him that chooses to care and devote energy to his friends. I'll show you an even smaller detail. In episode 2, when Oreki gets called by Chitanda to meet outside, the only thing bothering him is how he's wasting his precious sundae. Even when Chitanda sounded as earnest as she could while asking for help, Oreki retreated into his shell and only reluctantly agreed to help. In the final episode, the same thing happens. Chitanda calls him for help. Even while knowing he was being bothered to do work outside, he has no issue saying,
わかった。行くよ。
right away. That being said though, this isn't all the final episode had for us either. In the final scene of Hyouka, Chitanda tells Oreki about her plan to support her community, how she wants to help them grow, that this is where she truly believes she belongs. This is the final piece of her character. It's a show of Chitanda's resolve. Oreki sees this, forgets his ways, and nearly commits his entire life away to support Chitanda. This is the same Oreki that literally this episode was complaining about his energy conservationist ways getting challenged. The new, improved Oreki is ready to commit himself for Chitanda's cause. He knows that being there for her is the thing that really matters to him. Not being able to say exactly that is what the point really is. Oreki, even after his transformation, is still who he was at the start of the show. As much as he's moved forward and genuinely grown, the old Oreki still exists and restricts him. Change is a long process, and this final scene of Hyouka is a great representation of how much Oreki has changed and how much he still has to go. Hyouka is a story of Oreki changing, but I think more importantly it's a story of what it really took for him to get to that change. It was just a small shift in perspective and a reason to participate. For Oreki Houtarou, Chitanda Eru became his reason to care. Thank you all for watching.